And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 143rd episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, May 26, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, there was some crazy news coming right before Memorial Day weekend. Justin Smith, as everyone has now heard, is transferring from the Indiana Hoosiers. So we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff around it, but kind of how to replace him, some different lineup possibilities. Since last week we talked about lineups and how it's going to be forever changing, and we didn't want to spend too long talking about them. Well, lo and behold, a couple days later, all of everything we talked about with lineups is now completely changing. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about transfers under Archie Miller, since there have been a couple of transfers that we sometimes forget that Archie's had a couple transfers. So we're going to talk about anything and everything with transferring and Justin Smith tonight on our podcast. Here with me tonight, the crew is here yet again with me. Matt, I saw you last Friday. We were able to guest host with the Hoosier Heartland with Ben and Kathy and Robbie. So Matt, how have you been doing? How did that, if you listened to the episode, how did your tournament go? Did you fail everyone, or did you get to win some people some money?
I may have choked the tournament, but it's fine because we had fun, and that's all that matters, right? It wasn't like,
well, there's money on the line, so is that all that matters?
In my mind, that's how I'm phrasing it, because otherwise I think I drive myself insane. But yeah, no, long story short, I was in a Rocket League tournament, a video game that I play. We were playing for money, and I scored an own goal basically in the last 10 seconds of Game 5 of the series to lose us the game. We were tied, and that's how we lost. So tough feels.
Okay, cool. All right. So everyone else must have had a better weekend than you had, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It can't get much worse.
Yeah, no, I mean that's hilarious. See, I don't have any stories like that, but it was a fun Memorial Day weekend. It was warm where I was, which is around the state of Indiana. I went back to Bloomington for a few days. Now I'm back in Northwest Indiana, and it's hot wherever you go right now. But this Justin Smith thing, it's on the surface, it seemed like, based on the reaction we got on Twitter and social media in general, everyone was like, it's time. Like, that's kind of the overall reaction that I saw on a high level. It seemed like Indiana fans were just like, you know what? It is what it is. Let's move on. But, Noah and I, we were talking before, and I'm sure Matt agrees with this. Justin Smith transferring from Indiana raises a few questions. And I think over the course of however long this episode goes, we'll dive into those. So I'm excited to see what you guys have to say in general.
Yeah, for sure. And as we dive into this a little more, Matt, I think it's sometimes I don't want to start every segment all the time with just what are your thoughts, because that's pretty vague. But honestly, everyone has a different opinion on not just the player, but the situation. So I want to open it up with Matt. What are your thoughts on everything? Did this surprise you when the news came out Friday morning? Did you think that this was something that was going to happen, or this completely shock you? Kind of what went through your mind before we ended up podcasting together later that night?
Honestly, at first, I was a little surprised. I think my immediate reaction was, well, didn't see that coming. Definitely talked about him and the positions he could play in the last podcast. Now here we are sitting there on Friday. Like,
do you want to reiterate your bold claim that you made on Tuesday evening that is now obviously gone away 2 days after? Well, it could still happen. He's got a couple Big Ten schools on his list that are interested in him.
I said his upper tier potential was an all Big Ten type player, like a second team all Big Ten player. And I still will stand by the fact that if he was able to get a consistent shot, be able to dribble the ball sporadically, not even consistently, just sporadically, put the ball on the floor, using his athleticism, he'd be able to be in the all Big Ten team because he plays all Big Ten defense. He just needed the offensive part of his game to catch up to the defensive part. We had an all Big Ten player. But look, immediate reaction was shocked. After a couple hours of sitting on it, I wasn't very shocked. And honestly, I can see where he comes from, which is he's a senior, but there's a lot of people fighting for minutes at his position. And there's a lot of ways Archie can play, especially with Christian Lander coming in. Like we've talked about, they're going to have to play 2 point guards at some points and times, and that means that third position is up for grabs for a bunch of different variety of reasons, and there's many ways that Archie can use it. It's a very versatile position, especially in college basketball, less so in the NBA, but more so in college basketball. And Justin wants to play the 3, and I think Archie sat him down and was like, hey, we're going to need you to play the 4 this year. We only got 2 big guys. We're going to have to play a little bit smaller lineups, and you're going to have to play a larger position than you want to. And he's like, I got to make it to the NBA. And for Justin to make it to the NBA, which I hope he does, I hope he gets to chase his dream. I hope he gets to play basketball in the future and get paid for it, because that's something that's amazing that they have an opportunity to do so, that they're so great at their sport. But in order to get into the NBA, he's going to have to be a 3. He's not big enough to play the 4. Obviously can't play center, and he's not a shooting guard. He can't shoot. So he's going to need to play the 3 in the NBA. So he's going to probably try to go somewhere and transfer somewhere where he can get minutes that way. And it makes a lot of sense for Justin. It kind of hurts IU a little bit because you lose a senior and our best defensive wing player. But there's some possibilities for IU to where this you can turn this into a positive, right, Nathan?
Yeah, well, there are, but as far as my reaction to Smith, Matt, I was a little surprised you said you were shocked. I'm just gonna say how I felt, and that is like when I saw the news, I was like, all right, cool, okay. I mean, Justin Smith's transferring. The last couple off seasons, he has looked into the NBA draft advisory process. He's maintained his eligibility, but you can clearly see he's got his mind on the next level. And I'm just going to say it straight right now, okay? I think when you consider professional basketball, if I looked at the Justin Smith who played last season, there's no chance that player is playing in the pros. I don't care if the pros are in Slovenia or in Spain or in South Carolina. I'm sorry. I think nowadays more and more you're seeing that there's a trend where NBA scouts look at long athletic players and all of a sudden in your mind, you're saying, hey, maybe that guy has a shot in the NBA. Okay. But you've got to check more boxes than just being 6'7" with a 40-inch vertical in order to play professionally. And you talked about his shooting weaknesses, Matt. Those are glaring. But there are other areas where as an athletic forward, an athletic wing, I would have expected to see way more contribution out of a player like Justin Smith. Rebounding, steals, blocks. It's not just a matter of hey, he's 6'7" and 200 whatever pounds. And when it's all said and done, here's the funny part. I actually got a bit of a pit in my stomach when I saw Justin Smith transferring out of here, because on paper, or when you meet him in person, you go, wow, that guy's 6'7". He looks the part, okay? He looks like a basketball player. If Justin Smith transfers somewhere, especially within the Big Ten, and he's got a few offers, teams like Maryland, Illinois, Purdue, Northwestern, if Justin Smith goes out next year and has a huge season, that's going to raise a lot of questions about Archie Miller's ability to develop players. So it's going to be really interesting to find out how next year goes for Justin Smith, because I think that'll have a major impact on the evaluation of Archie Miller as a player developer. But Noah, I kind of want you to give your 2 cents on this as well, because I know you watch every game and I know you've seen Justin Smith play a lot. What are your thoughts on his transferring Indiana and what to expect of him in the future?
To be honest, it's kind of been a roller coaster of just thoughts and emotions in a way, because like you guys said at first when the news came out that he was transferring, I was like, okay, but then as I look into it more, I'm like, actually and I'm gonna give some stats here in a second. Actually, we're losing more of a player than we might actually think, and then it's like, well, I know he's a different collegiate player, and just there's a bunch of thoughts that go through your head. It's like, could this be better for the team? I don't know. Like it's a senior that's leaving, but there's just a bunch of thoughts that you could have, and I don't, and I know we don't want to speculate for the specific reasons, because I think it's also just, it's not fair to the player or the program to speculate on anything just because we don't have all the facts. There could be some very legitimate reason that we don't know of, and some things should stay private. I don't want the whole world to know some of my own private life, so we're just going to assume that the situation ended up turning the way that there's circumstances for him, and we're going to wish him all the best, that there's no ill will between anyone. So
yeah. And on that, I totally understand what you're saying as far as maybe something going on behind the scenes, because the timing of this does seem a little bit odd, right? I mean, there were some rumors earlier in the week, or maybe late last week, that Justin Smith had told his teammates he was out no matter what at the end of the season. And here's the deal: like, if that was true, wouldn't he have transferred back in March? I mean, that to me is where there's a disconnect there. So, it's rare. We were even talking about it last week about, hey, maybe a graduate transfer happens somewhere across college basketball. But, little did we know it's going to be Justin Smith. End of May? That seems like a strange timing. So it could very well be that there's something going on behind the scenes. We don't have all the information.
Yeah, that's what shocked me the most. We saw LJ Figueroa of St. John's go on the transfer portal today, but I think, like I mentioned with Christian Lander, I think the Christian Lander commitment and finally him reclassifying had a lot to do with this. Because remember, last Tuesday, we finally talked about that, and then on Friday, Justin finally transfers. I think when you look at, we're going to talk about in a minute about possible lineups without Justin now. When you look at the lineups and you add Christian Lander into it, the 3 position becomes a lot more jumbled than it would have been if Lander hadn't reclassified, because then everybody moves down the pecking order to maybe they'll play some more minutes at the 2. We're going to have Al fill in as backup point guard again for Rob when he's off the court. But now, there's a lot of people who can fill in. So that's kind of my reasoning and kind of my speculation on why the weird timing happened. But at first it shocked me, because I was like, he should have done this in March. If he's going to transfer, he should have done this in March for his own future, because then everybody's like, okay, we have an open roster spot, and now some of the roster spots have been filled, right? Like you had Seth Towns from Harvard, who's a small forward, went to Ohio State. Justin could have feasibly transferred to Ohio State if he wanted to, back before Seth Towns had, if Ohio State wanted to prioritize him. So,
yeah. Speaking of that position, Matt, that you're talking about filling that role, when you think about it a little bit, that was one of obviously the most set in stone starter basically is Trace. There's no debating that. But going past that, Justin was pretty close there. You might put Rob ahead of them, but you've kind of got Justin locked in there, at least at the beginning of the year, that specific starting role. He was right there, and he does more than I think we remembered. I was looking at stats like to kind of prepare for the podcast a little bit, and I was like, wow, Justin did a lot more even on paper than I thought. Because usually when you think of Justin Smith, and when he, besides his games where he does score like 20 to 30 points, he's usually a guy, when he contributes, it's something that's usually not on paper. It's more of the intangibles. But even looking at those tangibles, like Matt, I've got minutes, scoring, rebounds, steals, and field goal percentage to give you stats for. What do you think the average place he would rank on the team, like first, second, third, fourth, fifth? Out of all of those, what do you think he might average from the team last year?
Probably 4th. I think he was like the 4th best starter in terms of minutes. So I think it was like on average around 4th.
So I'm gonna pick on Matt just a little bit, just because I know Nathan knows all of these stats. But minutes, where do you think Justin in? And I'm gonna give you even last year's, including like Devontae and Duran and all those players there. Minutes, where do you think he was? Led the team, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Where do you think he was?
He's pretty versatile, so 2nd maybe.
First, led the team in minutes, 30.4 minutes per game. What about scoring? Where do you think he was for scoring? That's one that's traveled a little farther. You might know this one.
I know. I think he's second on the team
He
in
is
scoring.
the second returning scorer. Devontae was ahead of him, so
Yeah.
third from last year's team at 10.4 points per game. And that was something that you thought, well, Justin Smith wasn't necessarily his forte, yet he's the second leading returning scorer. Field goals is also second as well, and that's including Devontae last year. He's second total. What about rebounds?
Third.
Tied for second with Joey, so sort of kind of third. Tied for second at 5.2 per game. They both had 165 even for rebounds. Interesting fact. Yeah, they had the same amount. What about steals?
First on the team.
Yep, first. 31 total. Rob was second with 27. And then the other stat I was going to talk to you guys about, a field goal percentage.
Oh, goodness. Fourth?
Fourth, that's perfect. Yeah, fourth in field goal percentage at 49.2%. So just shooting about 50-50 from the field, right behind Trace, Joey, and Duran, which kind of works with how field goal percentage does. Usually the bigger guys, since they shoot closer, they have a higher field goal percentage, and the guys above him are the guys that are taller than him on the court. But another part is he also, a stat that especially this team 2 years ago that we talked about really that gets overlooked is that this guy has not missed a game. He has played in every single game that in his freshman, sophomore, and junior year, and he has not, besides tweaking an ankle, he hasn't gotten injured. Like, especially with the best ability is availability. I always say that wrong sometimes. The best ability is availability. This is a guy that doesn't get injured, and he's reliable to actually play every single game. And a couple of years ago, and at stretches last year, when you had all these players going down, Justin Smith was not one of those players going down, and that's a huge thing. Rob Finney is a guy that every Hoosier fan would want to see more of. And the biggest thing is his availability. That's kind of been hurting him. And that's so, like, Nathan, when you kind of looked over those stats, because I know you did an article all about this, did that kind of shock you with just actually how much he contributed, not even mentioning the intangibles of the defense that he does and everything?
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up, Noah, because, I'll take this to another level. Okay. And this is why you got to listen to our podcast, you guys, because here are all the Hoosiers over the last 10 to 12 years. I think it's 12 years to average 10 points a game and 5 rebounds a game. All right. 10 and 5. No big deal, right? Easy peasy. Well, how about this? OG Anunoby, James Blackman, Thomas Bryant, Trace Jackson Davis, Romeo Langford, Jawan Morgan, Victor Oladipo, Noah Vonleh, Christian Watford, Troy Williams, and Cody Zeller. I mean, you're talking about basically, outside of Yogi Ferrell, 10 or 11 of the best players to wear the Indiana jersey over the last 12 years. And the final guy on that list is Justin Smith. Yet for whatever reason, perception and reality have been a very interesting thing to track with Smith, really since the start of his college career. And, it's funny, right? There are a lot of people complaining on Twitter and Facebook like, oh, Justin Smith is this, Justin Smith is that. But how about at the start of the season? What were you expecting out of him? Were you expecting him to be a 17-8 type of guy? I don't know. And then I want to ask the same questions to the IU coaching staff, right? If I had, if I gave him the old truth serum, what would they say right now about how Justin Smith performed against expectations? I think the problem with Justin Smith is that you look at a 4-star recruit who chose IU over places like Villanova. And he came in here, and he had a learning curve, stage in the beginning. But then, I think the worst thing that happened to Justin Smith, as crazy as it sounds, was this huge game against Michigan State in Bloomington in his sophomore season. A game that IU desperately needed to have. Smith scored over 20 points. He had a career high in points that afternoon, and Indiana recorded a huge win. I think after that game, the entire expectation level for Smith changed. And it's funny. You would have thought huge game from Smith, big win for Indiana. It's going to do great things for Justin Smith overall. But I think looking back, it may have hurt him more than it helped him.
Yeah, this is just such a this man, we could really go on this podcast for a while. We do talk about actually how long our podcasts are, and recently we have been trying to get podcasts on the shorter side, but these topics have just ended up being much longer conversations, and this is a conversation that we could probably have for a couple hours if we really wanted to, just because there's so much to dive into, just because he is, especially at least on Twitter, such a polarizing player, for better or for worse. So let's kind of dive into a little more on how to replace him, because all of those stats that we talked about, even some of the ones that we've been talking about, and I talked a little bit more on the Hoosier Heartland podcast. Matt had to jump out early. I talked a lot about the intangibles with what Justin Smith does, which is all of that defense. And you talked, and I mentioned leading the team in minutes and the how he doesn't leave the court basically, and all this extra stuff that he does. It's got to be replaced somehow. So kind of, I think we all will probably have the same kind of thought. But first question, Matt, just real quick, do you think this is going to be more of a one person stepping in, or do you think it's probably going to be more of multiple people having to play the specific role that he had? Whether that role changes or kind of morphs into something else, it's still a role that has to be filled.
It's definitely be multiple people. I think that's the easiest answer. I think that's the correct answer in this case. You're going to be looking at people like Al Durham to fill in some minutes at the 3 as a third guard. You're going to be looking at Jerome Hunter stepping in and hopefully taking a larger role in the team. You're also going to be looking at people like the freshman, Geronimo, and you're looking at people like Armand Franklin was listed as a wing. As well as some people are going to fill in the role. So those are some names to look out for, filling Justin Smith's role. It's all up in the air. I couldn't tell you what the coaching staff is going to do, because a lot of it depends on how the players themselves personally develop. As much as I want to see Jerome Hunter fill in that role because I like his size and versatility, we could very much see somebody like Armand Franklin in there, who was listed on the latest Sam Story tweet as being a wing. Considered by the staff as a wing. So that would be an interesting fit, and especially with his defense, as somebody who we thought coming in was going to be a pretty good defensive player, ended up being a pretty good defensive player as a guard, as a freshman, and as somebody who can improve on that with a year of experience as a sophomore. And then you look at somebody like Al Durham, who's always been a bigger guard at 6'4". He's a large guard, and in college, a 6'4", 6'5" small forward isn't out of the ordinary. In fact, it's pretty atypical depending on the league that you're in. And the Big Ten is a little bit on the smaller side, but in a league like the A10 or the Missouri Valley Conference, that's a typical small forward, 6'4". So those are guys we could definitely look at filling in the role. And I really wouldn't mind seeing Al Durham as a larger guard in a 3-guard system with Rob Finney and Christian Lander playing together. I think Al brings a great 3-point shooting threat on offense, so he can space the floor. He doesn't need the ball in his hands. If he needs to play make, he can play make with his backup point guard skills. And then also on defense, he just gives versatility. Like if we need him to just chase down a 3-point shooter, depending on the size of the player, he can just chase that person around the court no matter what. Something that he's pretty good at doing. So I think this brings in a load of opportunities for IU and a lot of fun lineups we could talk about, but really the set in stone answers are only going to be answered by the coaching staff when we see them play next. Right, Nick?
And that's exactly where I was going, Matt, because this may be an annoying talking point for some people, but I'll say it once again. Archie Miller is under examination now, okay? The question of how do you replace a guy like Justin Smith falls squarely on his shoulders. If he feels like right now the current crop of wings that Indiana has is not going to be sufficient, well, he's got to hit the transfer window pretty hard ASAP or the recruiting trail in order to find someone, because Indiana does have a couple of open scholarships. But at the end of the day, Jerome Hunter last year, he averaged 3.8 points per game and 2 rebounds. Okay, we were talking about Justin Smith as a 10-5 player. Is Archie Miller going to take Jerome Hunter and elevate that 4 points and 2 rebounds up to 10 points and 5 rebounds? It's happened before. It's not a Herculean task.
No.
But will he be able to pull that off? And look, that's going to be a tough question. It's a question that should be asked in a lot of areas, okay? You can complain about someone as much as you want, whether it's in work or in life or in sports or whatever. But then the question is okay, how do you replace that person? And you know, Jerome Hunter is a straightforward answer, but man, this is going to be tough, especially since Smith is a guy who not only played the 3 for Indiana last year, but he had minutes at the 4, and occasionally, a very small percentage of the time, even had minutes at the 5 when guys like Trace Jackson Davis or Joey Brunk had foul trouble. There are not many players that can fit that type of versatility. But at the same time, in Big Ten play last year, over the 20-game Big Ten conference season, Justin Smith had just 5 blocks and he was a 25% career three-point shooter. So, you know, that's where Archie Miller is going to come in and answer some pretty tough questions, because I'm curious to see how it plays out, without a doubt.
Exactly. And I mean, just to add on to some of the points you guys said, just we got Michael in the chat saying like it's a big hole to fill, especially defensively on the boards. But he's talking about guys like he said, we have Race, Jerome, and Geronimo for that spot. So hopefully they emerge. And I think that's kind of the big topic about replacing his talent and what he's going to do on the court is kind of how these younger guys are going to emerge and develop. And that's kind of where Indiana is going to have to take steps forward. It's that next step, mentality that might actually make or break this team this year. That could potentially, if you've got one spot on the court with the team that's trying to get sort of kind of back to the tournament, and you've got one spot that's definitely rotating just because the level of play on the court is really just not up to snuff, and there's a rotating shell of guys that just can't really fit into that role for what they need, that's really going to hurt this team. So like Michael and like what you guys have said, it's really going to be these young guys that have to take those steps forward. And since Indiana hopefully is able to get on campus here shortly, that's also going to really help them with amidst everything going on. So let's kind of dive into, since we talked about Justin's talent specifically, what this means for the team as a whole. Because last week we kind of talked about, hey, Christian Lander's now coming to campus, then all of the rankings and stuff were updated. Like you saw Bart Torvik go up, like basically every site that kind of did the preseason rankings, Indiana went up 4 or 5 spots. Right now they're typically in the top 25, in between 20 and 25 for preseason rankings. So how does that change? What is their ceiling? What is their floor? And I think it's all pretty safe to say that their ceiling is lowered a little bit and their floor is also lowered just a little bit with how he with just because he's also a veteran. He's going to be a senior. When you lose a veteran senior, it's still hard to replace, even if the young guys step up. Doesn't mean necessarily that they can't succeed, but I think maybe the ceiling is the roof, might be just the roof might just be a little shorter. But I also thought of this specific thing was, now that Justin Smith is officially left, there's been a lot of turnover with this team too, just with transfers and seniors leaving. So just to recap, whether they're seniors or transfers, Duran, Devontae, Demidi, and Justin are leaving the program from the 1920 season to the 2021 season. And then coming in is Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway, Jordan Geronimo, and Christian Lander. And I'm just talking about more of the scholarship players just to make it easy for for you guys in the walk-ons. And I also thought, hey, how does that compare to maybe the year before? Because even you might not say that they took like leaps and bounds from 2 years ago to this past year, but they still obviously took strides forward because they were going to make the tournament compared to the year before where they just missed the tournament. A couple of years ago, they lost, and I think it was, and I'm counting Zach McRoberts as a scholarship player because he was. I think it was 5 or 6 players that they lost, and they only brought in 3 players. So actually, that's not as much turnover as they saw the year before, but it's still a third of the entire scholarship, basically a third, because I'm just counting it 12 free numbers. A third of the team is kind of turning over for what Archie Miller likes to have. So, Matt, how does this change the perception of where Indiana's going to go this year?
This is Archie's team now, and I think Archie needs to take responsibility for it. Al Durham is the only player on the team that has any affiliation with Tom Crean at all, as he was the last Tom Crean recruit to stay. With Justin Smith leaving, there was going to be 2. Now Al is the last one to be left with the program. So there is no more excuses for Archie. Like, we can make all the excuses we want about it wasn't his team 2 years ago. Half the team was Tom Green's team. Talent wasn't there. Even this past year, the main contributors like Devontae would have been a player that he would have recruited. He's not good enough. Deron Davis, he's great. Again, not a player that Archie Miller would have recruited. Those excuses, gone. Like, they're done. You can't use them anymore. This is his team. These are his players. It's who he's recruited. It's who he's gone after. It's who he's built the program around, all the scholarship numbers, everything. It's his team now. And he needs to prove it to us that he is the guy. This is the year. Like last year, he made the tournament. That's great. Just making the tournament at IU is not good enough to say you're a successful head coach at IU. It's just not a thing. You have to have consistent success, and consistent success means competing in the Big Ten, making the tournament every year, of course, but also staying relevant nationally. That means staying in the top 25 polls weekly, not dropping in and out. That means playing big teams and winning on the road, something that we haven't done. That's what we're going to judge Archie on this year, and that's what he needs to do with his roster.
And on that note, I look at this Indiana roster, and over on Indiana HQ, we've got a really clean scholarships page where you can see each year what the scholarship situation looks like over the next 4 or 5 seasons. And when you look at that, not only do I see some intriguing names and some opportunities, I see some guys where a really good coach will really maximize the potential of those players. And you can look at Trey Galloway or Anthony Leal. Okay, they're incoming freshmen. But now you're going to talk about more playing time for Jerome Hunter, and you're going to talk about more playing time for Race Thompson. Okay? Al Durham, Trace Jackson Davis probably benefit from Smith's departure as well. These are players who I think if coached properly and effectively can be very impactful players on a Big Ten basketball team. So actually, that's where I look at Justin Smith's transfer and I say, hey, you know what? We kind of knew what we were going to get over the course of a season from Justin Smith. We knew we were going to get something like 10 points and 5 rebounds per game. Next year, wherever he goes, I think he'll put up similar numbers. Now there's some uncertainty to it. And that uncertainty can be great. It could also be really rough if all of a sudden we realize, well, Jerome Hunter is actually a 4.2 rebound per game guy. Or Race Thompson, if you give him 30, 35 minutes, he's not capable of playing as efficiently with scoring and rebounding. So I look at this Smith transfer as the floor being lowered and the ceiling being raised. So that's where I see it. And I'm curious. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I don't know which way I'd vote right now, but when you look at some of the publications, I think CBS dropped Indiana a couple spots to 22nd or 23rd after the Smith transfer. So that's where the national media sees IU right now.
Yeah.
I'd also like to agree with Nathan. I think this improves the ceiling. I do. I think there are more talented, versatile players filling in the role, more promising ones as well. I think a good Jerome Hunter is better than anything we would have gotten out of a senior Justin Smith, especially offensively on the offensive side. Defense is out to see, is out. We're waiting to see on defense what Jerome Hunter can really bring us. I know he's pretty versatile and has length and can move. We understand that, but can he really understand the pack line like Justin was starting to get it last year? That's up in the air. But yeah, I do believe that Nathan is absolutely positively correct. This does nothing but increase our ceiling.
I don't know. I'd have to argue that a little bit. I think still a veteran senior, even if I just don't know if I'd place the hands, and this is nothing against some of those younger guys. I just don't know if I would, especially right away without some of the development, because I was looking more of the development aspect of giving them even more time and more game minutes where they don't have to be featured, not necessarily a redshirt role where they get to, but they still get to, they don't have pressure on them, basically. They've got a guy that knows what's up, and Justin Smith, even though he was a Crean recruit, still been with Archie for would have been all 4 years, and then the pressure wouldn't have been on any of the younger guys, so they could still end up growing without specific pressure. But That being said, I do. I also see your side, and in that way, I do agree. Just because if it ends up working and those guys, the playing time works and it all ends up flowing together, then definitely, especially by the end of the year, I think the ceiling is raised. Just because years down the road, I agree some of those players have more specific talent that could result in better play. But let's kind of talk about some of those lineups and how to specifically replace him physically on the court. Maybe not his specific play, but physically on the court, who's going to take some of those minutes, since he was last year, and then obviously would have been the returning highest, leading the team in the most minutes per game. We got to replace 30 minutes a game. So who's going to get that? But let's talk about that right after Nithin gives us who won the week. So Nithin, take it away.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Some of the college baseball magazines and websites have announced their All-American teams based on, it seems like, 2 or 3 weeks of college baseball being played from the spring. But IU got some pretty impressive accolades over the course of the last week or so. I saw D1Baseball.com said, hey, if the season ended today, after a couple of weeks, Indiana would have made the NCAA baseball tournament. In fact, yesterday, which is Monday, because we're recording on Tuesday, Monday would have been the day that they announced the entire NCAA college baseball tournament field. But within IU's baseball team, Grant Richardson, a sophomore outfielder, was named frequently in some of these recognitions. So he was named a third-team All-American by Collegiate Baseball. He was also the most impressive hitter in the Big Ten, according to Perfect Game, which is another college baseball magazine. So big-time accolades for Richardson, who, as a sophomore, looked to be one of the most impressive players in the conference. He saw that come to fruition in some of these nominations, and he's only going to be better as his career continues in Bloomington.
All right, on to some lineup possibilities. Let's start with the easy one, and I say easy one as in the very first game of the season. And it's only easy just because it's easier to kind of go off of what we've had this past year, because we're not going to be able to see too much out of the freshmen, even in preseason type of games. Even if Indiana can get on campus, even here in like a week or so, they're still going to be limited. Even getting on campus and doing stuff, you hear all of the NCAA football things, all the workouts, like how they can only have 10 people in the weight room. Then they leave and the entire weight room is just disinfected top to bottom, and then the next set of 10 people come in. It's going to work the same way. They're not going to be even all of the, I don't want to say handcuffs, but everything that they can't do normal practice season is going to be escalated even more just because of the pandemic going on. So I think game one is going to be maybe more of what we've seen this past year before we can see development from other people. So kind of the easy question, who is going to be in the starting 5 on game one? And that's kind of how we're going to replace Justin Smith. So Matt, who's going to be that guy that officially starts on game one for Justin Smith?
It's going to be Christian Lander, but he's going to be playing another position. So I think it's going to be the same starting lineup, which is Rob Finney at point guard, and then you add Christian Lander as a second guard. Then you have Al Durham as a third guard, and then you have Trace and Joey starting. I think that's going to be your starting lineup. I think that's who you're going to see on opening night for the Hoosiers, especially. I think that's what you're saying at the exhibition games, because I think I'm going to give Christian Lander a run out there just to kind of see what he will do against better competition.
Yeah, I'm gonna have, I think, one change to that. I think it's just one. I'm gonna take Lander out, okay? And I know Christian Lander's a 5-star recruit, and I know everyone's all hot and bothered over Christian Lander. Archie Miller loves himself some old guys starting in the lineup, okay? And at the end of the day, I know Jerome Hunter is technically a redshirt sophomore this upcoming season, but it's his third year in the program. So he's got a good understanding of what the offense is like, what the pack line defense is all about. So I'm going to have Jerome Hunter in there. So I have a Finney and Durham backcourt with Hunter, Jackson Davis, and Brunk in the front court. But, Noah, you were talking about the COVID-19 stuff and all the changes due to that. One answer we're going to find out, and maybe we have to wait until the first game of the season to really find this out, is who are the players that are really putting in the work at home during this offseason, because That's a huge wild card. If you have certain players with certain personalities that really need the guidance of the coaches and the program and the facilities, they're going to be in trouble when it comes to the season starting in November. But if you've got leadership and you got experienced guys that really, they really know what it means to put the work in and put the effort in the offseason, get your shots up on your driveway if you have to, those are the type of players that are really going to help elevate Indiana. So more than ever, I think the starting five you see on game 1 could be completely different when you go to game 5, to game 10, to game 20, and as you keep going, because man, talk about evaluation of players. It's going to happen on a game-by-game basis now more than ever.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I'll kind of go down the list on who to add into that extra spot, whether it's you go small or you go big. Justin Smith leaving, there's no real, without having a true freshman that is like a top 5 freshman, that's a guy that when you get him in, it's like there's no way he's not starting type of freshman. So you've got with our starting lineup that we have kind of solidified already, at least as of game 1, is Joey and Trace down low, and then Rob and Al at the guard positions. So when you go down the other list of players that are on this team, literally, you've got Armaan Franklin, and I don't think he's going to go into that. You got Trey Galloway. At game 1, I don't think he'd go into that. Jordan Geronimo, same thing. Even though he would be the most, he would fit into that spot more for what that position plays, and probably the most like Justin Smith physically. I don't think game 1 specifically, but then you go down to what Jerome Hunter, like Nathan said, which is a very big possibility. Then you've got Christian Lander, like Matt said, a very big possibility. Anthony Leal, just the same thing, just game 1. I don't know if he's going to get in game 1. Obviously, down the road's way different. Then you got all the way down to Race Thompson, and that's a big question mark. I just don't think he's going to go Race Thompson because it would be just a ginormous lineup because you'd have Race, Trace, and Joey in at the same time. And that's not even anything against Race. I just think that the position, just having too many big guys on the court, and Race, if he does start or come off the bench, I think it's going to be Race, Trace, and Joey rotating between 2 positions, not having all 3 at on the same time. So what you two said is it's really just Jerome or Christian. And I'm going to have to lean more towards Nathan. I'm going to have to lean more towards Matt just because you got to give him a shot just to see what he is. He is a guy that can still score the ball, and I just don't know if I'm ready to see Jerome start quite yet, unless, like you said, he's been putting in a lot of work in the offseason, and even work in the offseason is not necessarily game minutes. So starting game 1, I think Christian's going to be there with a really small guard lineup, especially since Archie's more of a guard player per se, since he was a guard in college himself. I think he might give Christian a spot, and it also might kind of elevate. You're giving Christian, I think, a lot more pressure now with minutes wise than you were originally, because there's going to be more minutes to go around. I think he's going to be playing a little more than he might have with Justin. Matt, do you agree? Do you think some of the minutes might be going more towards Christian and then on down the line?
Yeah, I think you're bringing in a 5-star recruit. He's got to get the minutes, right? Like, you're not going to have a 5-star recruit coming. We're not Kentucky. You're not sitting behind other 5-star recruits here. The level of talent from Christian to the other players, no offense to Jerome, there's a large gap there. No matter the age difference between the two, there's still a large gap in the potential talent that both of them have, even though I think Jerome is a possible NBA type talent if he can develop correctly. I just think Christian's coming in to play starting minutes. He's coming in to fill a specific role on the team and show off what he can do as a basketball player. And starting is obviously going to help him do that. Again, look at Devontae Green last year. You don't have to start to get starters minutes. And I think that's a lot of what we're going to see from Jerome Hunter, because I think we're going to need depth at point guard specifically, and the 2 guard. We're going to need experienced depth because you have starting somebody like Christian Lander in the beginning, and then you go down the line and go, okay, the second most experienced guard is Rob Finney after Al Durham, and then the third most experienced guard is, oh goodness, it's Armaan Franklin, right? So we're going to need experience or somebody to fill in. And I think Jerome Hunter can come in and kind of condense that guard rotation so that during big games, when we're away at Michigan, when we're away at Michigan State, and we need somebody to come in and fill in minutes about somebody who has played at the Big Ten at the Big Ten level, Jerome Hunter is going to be able to give us bigger minutes there.
So as Matt just alluded, Nathan, that was my next point, is just because there's a starting five that we've especially known with Archie, at least the last half of this past season, doesn't mean that you're going to get the most minutes. So after the starting five, who's going to start getting those minutes? And I think the obvious answer, which is what you said the starter was, is Jerome Hunter, but he's not going to get 30 minutes a game. So which other, and it's going to kind of come down to some freshmen, which other freshmen / any other type of forwards do you think are going to get some of those minutes that we got to dole out 30 minutes?
Yeah, I think Race Thompson is the first guy that comes to mind. It's really interesting to me to see exactly what type of player Thompson grows into next year. But as far as some other possibilities, I want to talk about those incoming freshmen just a little bit, okay? Anthony Leal and Trey Galloway, they're not scrub players, okay? There are a lot of other schools in Big Ten country, even entire college basketball nation, that would love to have Leal and Galloway come in and join their freshman class. Talking about a couple of 3-star, 4-star sort of on defense type of players who really bring some valuable skills to Indiana as long as they can keep progressing from what they showed in high school. Leal's a 6'5" shooting guard, but, hey, maybe Archie Miller does lean towards a smaller lineup, and maybe that does mean Leal gets some minutes at the 3. Trey Galloway's even smaller, but, all indications are at Culver, he was a really impressive player. And then the last guy, Jordan Geronimo, he's not from Indiana, and he's not he's not a 5-star kid, but all of a sudden, this Smith transfer opens up a ton of minutes for this kid because he's a 6'6" player, and as you guys talked about, he fits that physical profile. Can jump through the roof. He's great at things like rebounding and getting steals. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how many minutes Geronimo gets at the start of the season and then at the end, because all indications that character-wise and fit-wise, he could really be part of the solution at IU.
Yeah, there's what you said with the freshman, Nathan, is so big. That's going to be the key as to where I think we could see someone start to emerge. I think overall, since Justin did take 30 minutes a game, which is a large portion, he's pretty close. He's a few minutes away from playing like Yogi Ferrell type of minutes where you play 34, 35, 36, where you basically play the whole game. Where it's very rare, even close to rarefied era, where those players that can play all 40 minutes, but he's playing a very large portion of minutes. And I think in general, I think some of the minutes are going to be doled out to everyone. Like everyone's going to be like, their minutes are going to be up to like a minute or two. But then like we talked about, it's going to be some of those guards. Then you're going to have Jerome Hunter coming in and definitely playing a lot more than he was last year, to say the least. And then, like you said, it's going to be kind of Trey, Anthony, and Jordan. Even though they don't really play the same position, there are minutes up for grabs, and it's kind of going to be who's going to battle it out the most between those three. Who's going to develop the quickest? Who's going to kind of get Archie's defensive system the quickest? Because I think that's also a huge key, because we're losing so much defensive power from Justin, and that's something I don't think any Hoosier fan can argue, at least. Basically, who's going to emerge from those guys, and then it's going to kind of come on down from there, because you got the guards more or less solidified with the 4 guards there. You've got the lows solidified with Race, Trace, and Joey more or less, and then it's going to be kind of those guys who's going to step up. Since now we have 11 scholarship players, there's less players, and then more kind of time. There's not as many people to battle for those positions.
Well, and that's where those scholarship spots, those 2 scholarships that are just glaring at you. What type of initiative does Archie Miller take between now and probably the next 2 or 3 months? Is there a foreign player that catches his eye? I just saw that Minnesota picked one up a few days ago. Is there a grad transfer that's available? Are there any class of 2020 freshmen that are still looking for a spot? Or maybe if they haven't submitted their letter of intent in, if they've maybe committed to a mid-major school, can Indiana swoop in and maybe land a decommitment from that kid so he can come to IU. Lots of questions, and hey, maybe we were caught off guard by the Smith transfer last week. Maybe we have a new transfer that we're going to be talking about next week. I don't know.
Exactly. That's why we didn't want to spend too long on this, because of that. So we're just those are lineups assuming that the 11 stay the 11 exactly. But let's move on. Matt, give us your social media shout out for this week.
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be a quick segment because, well, as you know, with the sports world, not much going on. So my first shout out is to this young man called David Damon. He is a 4-star corner, I believe, or safety from Georgia. And he has offers from Michigan, Miami, Oklahoma, Louisville, and we made the top 6 with the likes of those schools. He's at Damon David, so that's Daymon David on Twitter. So go give it a like. Don't tweet at him, but you can go like his tweet. That is legal. And then second social media shout is go check out the Hoosier Heartland podcast that Noah and I did on Friday. Their Twitter is at IU Heartland on Twitter. So go give them a follow, and then also go watch the podcast if you haven't. It's really awesome. Noah did a great job after I was going to get my butt kicked in the Rocket League tournament. So that was great. But yeah, and then also follow us on social media while you're at it, while you're following everybody else. And that's at Indiana HQ and then at Hoosier Sound on Twitter. So go follow us there. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, the Hoosier Heartland podcast is really cool just because you also get more of a deeper dive. I know you've listened to some episodes, if you have, on the origin of the Hoosier Sound, but we really dive deeper with them about kind of the Hoosier Sound history, and then bringing in Indiana HQ, because we did not start together, basically. So go listen to it. It's really cool. Those are also great guys over there with Ben, Robbie, and Kathy. All right, let's talk just a little bit about transfers under Archie Miller. And Nathan brought up this question/topic/thought process when all this news came out. And it's kind of basically the question is, should we be brushing or shrugging all of these transfers off for Archie anymore? Or should we be questioning these, basically, more or less? And there have been 6 transfers under Archie Miller in 3 years: Curtis Jones, Grant Galon, Clifton Moore, Jake Forrester, Demezy Anderson, and then now Justin Smith. So basically 2 per year, which is what it's come down to. And I know Nathan wants to talk about this. My initial thought is kind of, I understand what Nathan's going for maybe we shouldn't be shrugging it off anymore, but I'm maybe more in a wait and see mode, just because transfers are now something that college basketball and starting to become college football have never seen before. We're in uncharted territories with the amount of transfers that are starting to be able to leave, and just basically how popular it's becoming with transfers, and how it's becoming more or less, quote unquote, okay for people to leave. It's not like it used to be decades ago, where you would not leave the team and you would stay there for 4 years, basically all 4 years. So I'm just going to wait and see, since when you look at some of the other transfers, I think all Hoosier fans can understand most of those transfers. So that's kind of where I'm at.
And honestly, you're right as far as the transfer becoming trendy now more than it's ever been. I know Jeff Goodman continually keeps a list going. It's like 400 players or something over the course of a year. I maybe have that number wrong, but I feel like the number just popped in my head. But anyway, with Indiana though, I feel like these transfers should be taken more seriously, because Archie Miller is not Tom Crean, and that Archie Miller is not going out and trying to get sort of splashy home run recruits, maybe with the exception of Romeo Langford. Archie Miller's entire thought process, even when he goes after 5-star players, which he does so successfully, his thought process is, hey, let me bring him in, let me teach him our system offensively and defensively. And, assuming we keep getting through to them, they'll get better and better and better. Unfortunately, when you have guys leaving after year 1 or year 2 or year 3, all of a sudden those years where you really do see fruits of your labor, which I would say are probably those junior and senior seasons, all of a sudden don't really get to be recognized. And then the other part of this to me also is the first 5 transfers that we talked about are all kind of the same story. You know, maybe they play a year or two at Indiana, not getting the minutes. They go out and try to see if the grass is greener somewhere else. Justin Smith's transfer, it initially didn't shock me. And then I sort of looked into it and I said, this smells funny. Okay, this Justin Smith transfer smelled a little funny. And I went back and looked it up. The only player in recent memory to play 3 years at Indiana and then transfer somewhere else is Maurice Creek. And for those of you that may not remember the name, Mo Creek was a shooting guard who had a horrible injury history at IU, where a change of scenery was really the only kind of reasonable option for Creek and for Indiana overall. I mean, you thought Indiana was hurt by injuries with guys like Rob Finney or whatever. Mo Creek had some of the roughest injury luck that I have ever seen in college or the pros. So for Smith to play 3 years at IU and then leave is just something we don't see. And I'm curious to know what the conversations were behind the scenes. And I wish I were a fly on the wall in that discussion where Justin Smith, legitimately referenced, hey, even Indiana basketball referenced that Archie Miller and Justin Smith sat and talked and discussed, and they figured out this is the best next step for everyone involved. I wish I could have the transcript to that conversation, but it's just Justin Smith. And we sent out a poll the other day saying, hey, what are your feelings about this Justin Smith transfer? And only about 13% said, hey, this is a big deal for Indiana. I would side with those 13%. Okay. And I know maybe Justin Smith wasn't the flashiest basketball player, but for him to spend 3 years at IU and then leave, to me, is kind of a big deal. And I'm like all of you. I'm curious to see how it works out.
I think it's a big deal because, again, like you said, we spent 3 years developing him. But honestly, outside of the effort put into him, I really don't think it's a big deal. If he doesn't want to be here, I don't want him here. And that is my mindset on it. Because he doesn't want to be there, and it's not good for you to be sitting in a toxic situation that you don't want to be in. And then at the same time, if the staff isn't using him correctly and he's hurting the team, I also don't want him to be here. And I think it was a little bit of both. I don't think he really fit into the system well offensively. At times we would stagnate on offense, especially when the ball was in his hands. And then at certain points, I don't think he was getting the right play calls for him. So I think it works for both sides. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I do think he maybe should have transferred early. If he thought this was going to be an issue and saw this ahead of time, and NBA scouts were like, you need to play this more, you need to work this into your offensive game, and Archie was like, we don't want you to do that, then he should have left last year. He should have left before the season. It's kind of sad that I was looking forward to seeing him his senior year, and he's gone as a fan. But for him, it's good. He gets to go one more year, gets to work on his game, and I don't think it's that big of a deal.
And almost, Nathan, to your point, and not to bash it, just kind of also to flip it all a little bit. Even then, when you think about that, because you look at those other 5 specific Archie IU transfers, and you talked about even IU transfers in recent memory, you think that one stands out so much just because you talked about Mo Creek, where those injuries, it's just like, it's also the complete opposite. It's not the same situation at all, even though that's the only 3-year player that you could even find. Is this such an anomaly that it really is an anomaly, basically, where it's such a peculiar situation and it's not the norm, where maybe it's just that one-time thing that just happens every once in a while for, like we've said, all of the could be hundreds to dozens of factors that we just really don't know. And I think Matt also gave a lot of really good points just now about factors that could have gone into it. So I agree with you. It definitely questions it a little more than before, but that's just maybe more wait and see. And if it continues, then it's kind of like, oh wait, maybe now this kind of goes to the forefront. The fodder is here right now. The fire is kindled. Let's see if it gets bigger or kind of goes away.
Exactly. And that's really what it's going to come down to. I mean, I'll be happy. You will be happy. I think Indiana fans in general will be happy if we can just kind of go, okay, done and dusted. Justin Smith was kind of a one-time deal where he just moved on. It's gonna bug everyone, and maybe bug is an understatement. if Justin Smith ends up going to Illinois or Purdue or whatever and turns into a real impact player, turns into a second-round pick, because that not only says a few things about Justin Smith, it says a few things about IU's coaching staff. So that's where we're just going to have to wait and see at this point.
Yeah, if he goes to Purdue,
Did Purdue have interest? I don't remember if Purdue had
Yes.
interest. They did? Okay. There was a couple Big Ten teams. You have to go look at the list. He had like 30 interested parties, as he probably should have. But that's going to wrap it up for our 143rd episode of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you all so much for joining us. As always, thank you to the live audience. Thank you to Michael and everyone for coming out and participating in the chat. We really appreciate your support. News and updates, Twitter, just like normal. Subscribe to our show so you don't miss out on anything. But most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Apple Podcasts, Facebook is easiest. Tell a friend, share links. Your support is really how we grow this podcast to reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
See ya.